Hi everyone, this is Philosophy of the People with Ben Burge and Stefan Bertram. I'm hearing that Joe Biden's been shot dead in Dallas.
Yeah, it's a good. I like it. Yeah, yeah. I heard
It's,
that. I
it's going
heard
to be
that.
a hard one today to actually talk about philosophy.
I know. I know. So, an hour. So, I teach this capital class on Sunday. Well, afternoons EST, so mornings my time, and I was about 2/3 of the way through the lecture this morning when somebody in the Zoom said that Biden had dropped out, and then everything kind of ground to a halt for a few minutes so everybody could check that out. And then we finally got back on track. I was like, all right, you guys want me to finish the lecture at least? And so very, very, we had already cut into like half of what should have been the discussion time anyway. I finished the lecture, gave everybody a minute to get their thoughts together. And I was like, you know what? I feel like a middle school algebra teacher when a dog has run into the classroom and I'm expecting people to like pay attention to algebra. Uh, like just let's just you know we could talk about the chapters we went over today next week, but let's just leave early. Everybody can go to Twitter, play with the dog.
I remember when I was 15 during the 2010 general election, and not all the results had come in by the time I went to school in the morning. And so my teacher was asking me like what the result was, and I was like, well, this is what it was when I last checked, but I'd have to look at my phone to check now, which obviously wasn't allowed. And she was like, just look on your phone. Like, there's some things which are more important. But obviously, when you're 15, that's like, wow, that's a big thing.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, yeah. No, it really is amazing when you realize like it's only been about 3 weeks since the debate. Like,
That's crazy,
uh,
yeah.
yeah, it's been well under a month since the debate. It has been an insane month. Like, that debate was like everybody went in, I think, with the expectation, okay, Biden's going to seem a little out of it and he's going to say some weird shit. But like, there's a certain baseline that everybody was expecting. And then he
Yeah, no, like I thought they would give him loads of amphetamines or whatever, like in the
he just
jokes. But then, like, they
limbo
were like, no,
danced
we're
so
just going to give him.
far below that baseline expectation that like I saw a New York Times thing where they're talking about a debate watch party for Biden staffers and pro Biden influencers, where somebody was like lying on the floor mooning at one point. There was a point where the feed cut out and you could hear somebody say, "Oh, thank God." Like, and
Uh,
like after that, you know, Biden spends all this time being like, "Nope, I'm in. Nothing, no force on earth could get me. Only the Lord Almighty," he said at one point, "could get me to drop out of the race." And which was also hilarious because when he was saying stuff like that, like after like a week of him saying stuff like that, like constantly, Nancy Pelosi was in an interview. She was like, "Well, we'll just have to wait to see what he decides."
have you seen that Alan Sorkin dropped the worst ever post this morning?
Aaron Sorkin, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he dropped some sort of bizarre fanfic, here's how it's scripted. Um, but then like, okay, so this is all dominating everything for a couple weeks, like 2 weeks, and then um, and then Trump gets shot in the face. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. God turns aside a bullet from Trump right into a chud fireman.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I don't know. I'm told by yeah, I told a friend who grew up evangelical, like, I don't understand this theory that God saved Trump. That's like, surely if God saved Trump, you mean God killed that firefighter, right? Like, so he decided to sacrifice him to save Trump. And he was like, yeah, you just don't get how these people think. But,
Well, I mean, they probably think that if God had offered that choice to the fireman, he would have said yes, and now he's in heaven, so, like, who cares?
yeah,
Like, he's better off.
I guess, yeah.
He's become a
Uh,
holy martyr. We need to think in, like, Shiism terms here.
oh, there you go. Um, and then just for fun, while we're like going through how weird the last few weeks have been, 2 days after Trump was shot in the face, uh, he like I don't know, maybe this one feels weirder to me because I'm just the right age that I spent much of my childhood watching like Hulk Hogan like fight the $1 Million Man and WWF back when it was still called that. And so the sight of Hulk Hogan at the RNC screaming and ripping his shirt off to reveal the Trump fans shirt under it, like definitely felt to me like it goes somewhere on the list of the weirdest shit that's happened in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause I guess you had like obviously like Arnold Schwarzenegger becoming governor of California, Republican governor of California, but
Yeah.
there's kind of like some separation where he didn't play Arnie like on stage.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, the thing is now it's like Hulk Hogan in character,
Yes.
like the
No, we
character Hulk Hogan
we are
went to the
three
Republican
spins
convention.
of the chaos wheel away from actually getting President Camacho Supreme. Um,
Yeah, I saw that Obama pointedly did not endorse Kamala in his statement.
Biden, you mean? Yeah. Yeah. So,
No, I mean Obama.
oh, you mean Obama? Okay, I didn't
Yeah,
see that. Yeah, because I thought
yeah,
it
he
was
just
funny that Biden's initial statement, the only mention of Kamala was one sentence that was like, "Thank you for your service," basically. But then a few minutes
I
later,
wonder if they just wrote it last week before they got their things in order and they just released it. But then, yeah, because he then dropped immediately another thing for Kamala, didn't he?
exactly right after that, he dropped the Kamala endorsement. So I don't know. I'd really like to think that the reason that like Biden finally dropped out today was that today is when Hunter finally crashed, so he wasn't around to give him his like daily pep talk about why he should stay in the race. But but yeah, it's been a very 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 weird few weeks. But somewhere in the middle of all that weirdness, uh, I say, oh wow, it's also a hardcore Ukrainian nationalist assassinated the other day, likely because of her support for the mobilization law. I actually saw like last week maybe some pretty shocking poll results from Ukraine because like
Yeah, like a total turnaround in previous results. When
yeah
previously it was like
exactly
maybe 60-20 against negotiations, it's now like 50-40 or 50-30 or something.
yeah
Like in
exactly
favor.
that yeah suddenly that the public opinion has swung behind the negotiations and also I mean like Eastern Europe, this is like a pretty radical change. Like there's like a majority of the public say that it's like not shameful to like resist to
God,
try to
yeah,
avoid.
there's been a lot of political violence, which is the topic of today. Not just
Indeed.
obviously. Then it's obviously the question of what is political violence? Was the Houthi strike on Tel Aviv political violence, um, and was the Israeli response political violence? Is the Ukraine war political violence, or is it only kind of Ukrainian internal dimensions which are political violence?
Yeah, so this is the this is a term that of course is usually thrown around without a clear definition, which is definitely part of the problem.
And it
uh,
usually means like domestic political violence, right?
yeah, in practice it seems to mean domestic political violence, although I actually think a decent number of these points can be applied that there are to make about it could be applied to global political violence. But
Right. 'Cause, I mean, you bring up my war essay in the article, right?
yeah, I do. So yeah, we are going to have to keep this stream pretty short because I'm supposed to write an article for Jacobin about Biden dropping out this afternoon. but but yeah, I basically
Do you think if the shooter had shot Biden in the ear last
he
week,
he would be able to
could you?
stay. I have no
Yeah,
idea, no idea. That's a we're in such weird uncharted waters. I just don't even have a good sense of that. And also, from what I've seen, the shooter, like, there's definitely a nearby possible world where the shooter did shoot
yeah,
Biden because it looks like he did searches on both of them
yeah.
to
It's
that
it's just Trump does more rallies in like trailer park kind of style
yeah
places.
well I mean he does more rallies period
Yeah,
Biden has been, wisely trying to minimize his exposure to the public. But yeah, I mean, so this actually does take us to, well, so I say basically, all right, somebody had actually suggested that when I posted the last essay on social media, you should do something on political violence, because of course at that point, when I posted the previous essay, it had been a day after the assassination attempt. And I thought, you know what, that actually makes sense. I think there is some stuff to say about it, at least some of which would sort of fit naturally into philosophy Substack. So I basically make 3 points about this, which, the third one in terms of the order of presentation at the beginning, but the first one in terms of unpacking them is, basically try, it's good to exercise a bit of epistemic discipline when sort of shocking events happen, and not just convince yourself of whatever narrative about what happened would be most politically convenient to you to believe, since I've been seeing, an awful lot of that since the Trump shooting. At the, like when it first happened, I saw a lot of progressive types on social media who had Thomas. I already condemned them this morning. I got it out of the way before breakfast.
With my morning prayers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I assume that's just how you're supposed to do it. Like, you say grace before before the meal. Thank you for this bounty. Blah blah. Blah. We condemn Hamas. All right, everybody, let's eat. But yeah, I'm kind of imagining the Ricky Bobby saying grace. Throwing that in at the end. But yeah, I think. Yeah, when it first happened, I saw a lot of progressive types on Twitter who convinced themselves that it was staged, which is basically, I think they saw that picture going around, which, sort of like minutes after it happened became this like iconic image of Trump with the blood streaming down his face, being held up by the Secret Service as he's like pumping his fist with the flag waving behind him. And of course, everybody's immediate reaction to the picture was, "Oh God, that's the election," which actually, at this point, looks like it was a little premature, which makes sense to me, because even though that was definitely my first reaction, right when I saw it, I just had this like immediate feeling in the pit of my stomach. It's like, oh shit, he's winning. The truth is that the public is so polarized that it just isn't going to have the kind of dramatic effect that we would sort of classically imagine that
It's kind
having
of
on.
crazy that over the past like 30 years or more, like every election since I guess like Reagan has been like 50-50 basically, despite like how much has changed in like
Yeah,
demographics and
I mean, it
political
is kind
positions
of
and so on.
remarkable how few like how few blowouts we've had. I
Yeah,
mean,
not just
even
like polarized, but seemingly polarized in almost two same size camps, right?
yeah. I mean, like, because even the Obama ones, like the first Obama one I know was like a big electoral college blowout. But I think in terms of popular vote, it wasn't actually
I think it was like
like I think.
53 or something, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
52.9.
Yeah, because I remember it was like I had a bet going with my little brother about what the result was going to be, and I'd actually predicted that Obama would get 2/3 of the electoral vote, and he, and I ended up having to buy him a bottle of bourbon instead of vice versa, because he came like just short of that. So like once, it was like it was like, I mean, I think he was like could have like one swing state away maybe from getting that, but it was still only like 50, yeah, as you say, like 52.9 or whatever, in terms of the popular vote. So yeah, I think with the numbers this polarized, it doesn't actually move the needle all that much, as sort of, I mean, it definitely hypes up the Republican base. But anyway, certainly conventional thinking, right? You see that picture, you think, oh shit, that's the election right there. And so it certainly seemed like it was just going to be very politically good for Trump. And, don't get me wrong, it is politically good for Trump. But I think because of that, I think a lot of people's minds just immediately went to, oh, therefore it was an inside job. And, which is insane because what you'd have to believe that would be that Trump, who was already ahead in the polls, volunteered to get shot in the face so he could become more ahead in the polls, that he could firm up his lead a bit.
It also requires hundreds of people to basically risk their lives on Trump keeping a secret.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. If Trump had staged it, he probably would have just like casually mentioned it while he was
Yeah,
rambling.
you would have told us at some point during that 90-minute RNC speech.
Yeah. 3 hours into the RNC speech, you'd be like, and that shooting? Yeah, we staged that. We did that.
It was meant to go right through here with my shoulder, but the shooter, not very good.
Exactly. That's why we had to kill him. Yeah. Like the idea that, like, even if the shooter was the world's greatest marksman, like, an inch and a half the other way, Trump would be dead. Right?
Yeah, I
Like
guess it
that's
made slightly more sense in the initial thing where they were talking about maybe it hit, like he was like glass shatter that hit him.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
If that had been
And
the
it's
case.
also the fact that it wasn't one shot, it was like six.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I saw a computer modeling thing later. Like he came like really, really shockingly close to getting killed. Right? I mean that is something he
So
said.
the shooter would have killed Biden because Trump is like always doing this,
Yeah.
while Biden like keeps his head like.
Yeah, exactly. It was a much more stable target. Like, yeah, Trump had happened to like turn a little bit to one side just before, but if he hadn't, he'd be dead. Um, and yeah, then after, I think my impression, so I remember like John Cusack, for example, tweeting it was staged conspiracy stuff. He started his tweet with the classic siren song of the conspiracist, which is I don't like conspiracy theories, but uh,
I
you
mean,
know,
it's been interesting that it's
it's
become
it's
like.
it's like the old like meta racist joke. You know, how does every racist joke start? It's
It's become like politically unacceptable for any liberal to even kind of joke about approving of the shooting, like any mainstream liberal, like with the
yeah,
whole Tenacious D thing,
yeah. That's true.
which kind of
That's
shows that the whole idea that civility is dead, we're going to have constant like 100%, 100 degrees Celsius politics all time seems fake. And at least the
yeah.
libs are quite good at civility, and the Republicans have even like they haven't really gone that crazy considering Trump literally got shot.
It would be very easy to imagine the Republicans going much crazier than they have in the last week. Considering, I agree with that,
Like the
but
whole, I mean, you talk about stochastic terror in the
yeah,
article, and tend to agree with you. And not just because the concept is kind of vague, but it doesn't really seem to be something that people are really doing to the degree that is a real thing.
yeah. Um, like again, you could so easily imagine Trump like really going nuts in the aftermath of this, right? That the like it's just so easy to imagine. In fact, it's maybe would have been easier to imagine him responding that way than what he actually did, which is to say that like certainly some of his high profile surrogates have dabbled in light conspiracism, but like okay, he has but but yeah, I mean, it seemed like he had some kind of animal instinct for like, okay, if I act too crazy, then I might actually be squandering whatever gifts this gives me politically, right? Like, so yeah, it's but yeah, like then after, and yeah, and I agree that like, libs do a lot more civility politics because it's, because they're technocrats, right? That's on brand for them. But in any case, after like most of the lib conspiracy theorists had sort of quietly let go of all of that, he, then everybody kind of switched. So everybody kind of switched places, and the right took up the conspiracism, and I've certainly seen a lot of that on social media, and there was, as I said, definitely at least some light dabbling in it in multiple RNC speeches. So because the basic problem from their perspective, like the problem from the lib perspective is, oh, Trump getting shot is like wonderful for him politically, right? So that's just so convenient that he happened to get shot and only grazed and got this amazing picture and blah blah blah. But the problem from the right politically is, well, given everything we have, of course, a very incomplete picture because it's such early days, but like given everything we know so far about the shooter, it seems like, yeah, it's a 20-year-old Republican gun nut who has, who like everything that we know makes it seem like his motivations probably, had less to do with politics than just kind of a desire to shoot someone famous and go out in a blaze of glory, as Ryan Grimm said. It seems like the standard school shooter profile, and as he also said, it's an amazing indictment of American society. We all know what that means, right? It's like, oh yeah, standard school shooter profile, sure, one of those. Uh, but in any case, so they have trouble accepting that it's like, well, hold on, if what seems to have happened here, right? That like, it's not
It's
even clear
hard to
how
narrativize.
it's very hard to narrativize. It just seems politically meaningless. So it must not have been what it seems. It must have been that either, maybe he was a patsy, or at the very least, uh, he wasn't what he seemed like at all. He was a plant. I've seen people say things, oh, how many 20-year-old kids don't have any online presence, that you can find later. The answer, by the way, tons of them. That if you
It depends what
like,
you mean, right?
yeah,
Like in terms of like having a Twitter account versus posting on Twitter.
yeah, and like honestly, a much smaller percentage of the population has Twitter accounts than people tend to think if they're, you know, in the posting class like us, right? That
Like the one comment they did find of him was apparently a Steam comment, and
yeah,
Steam is just like you are inherently signed up to it if you want to basically play video games on your computer.
yeah, that's the thing. The only social media platform that actually has like an overwhelming majority of young people using it is YouTube. And of course, the way that the overwhelming majority of those use it is they just watch videos, right? Like, it's it's
And comment like,
actually
"Nice video, YouTube man."
yeah. Yeah. I mean, even Instagram is only about 60%, even in his age group. It's Twitter is it's a large majority, but it's a minority. It's a large minority. It's not an insignificant. It's a significant minority, but it's a minority, right? Who actually use Twitter,
Yeah.
Facebook. I mean, that's a retirement community at this point. Like, so yeah, that part's not actually unusual at all. I've also seen people say, "Oh, it's registered Republican." Well, isn't that suspicious in itself? How many 20-year-old kids are registered a political party? Tons of them. About half of Americans in his age group are registered to vote. And if you live in Pennsylvania, one of the boxes that you check is for party affiliation. And it's unclear how political this kid was, but given that he seems to have been pretty into gun culture, it's unsurprising that his instinct
And,
at
and
that
his,
moment.
his parents were both registered with a party, right? Or a grouping, or whatever you call them in the United States.
I think so.
So they could have just done it as a job lot.
Yeah. Um, So, and again, I mean, in fact, this is all like my initial prediction when it happened, was I'll bet he's ideologically incoherent because people who do these sort of spectacular shootings usually are. Um, and since then, it seemed like I was wrong, mostly in the sense that like seemed to have been that ideological
Yeah, there's
period.
not enough there to be incoherent.
Yeah, exactly. Because usually, like the sort of cycle of these things is, somebody shoots up a grocery store or something, and um, and then I would assume that's what all my comments say. I don't know. I haven't checked. But yeah, somebody shoots up a grocery store or something, and they leave like 100-page manifesto, and then there's this sort of like grotesque ritual where partisans read through the manifesto looking for evidence that he agreed with the other people, and usually you can find some stuff because like the
I
manifesto is
remember.
usually just like
I think it
100
was
pages
also
of
in
rambling insanity.
Pennsylvania
What's that?
when I think it was also in Pennsylvania, or he was from Pennsylvania when some kid like went to a mall and specifically shot black people. I did literally download his manifesto and Control F for Ukraine
Yeah. Right. A lot of
to
people
see
doing
what
that.
kind of Nazi he was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That is a that seems like a pretty divisive issue in the Nazi community. Uh,
The thing is, was he hadn't like obviously it's a really long manifesto, so it took him a while to write, and so by the time he published it, he was like 12 months out of date, so he hadn't even really written anything about Ukraine.
yeah. Um, so yeah. Then the second point was the thing about stochastic terrorism, which oh, actually, sorry. Just to wrap up the one about epistemic discipline. I think it is like probably by far the most common reason I've seen advanced to think that this wasn't just single shooter who is what he seems to be, right? School shootery kind of kid. Um, is that oh, look at all these details coming out about how so therefore it must have been like the deep state conspiring to to let Trump get shot, and it just seems to me that like I don't know why we'd expect the Secret Service to be hyper competent.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
Like
lot of both kind of liberal and conservative conspiracy theories in the United States, which kind of rely on the premise of the police aren't actually bad at their job. There's somebody else to explain it when it seems like they're bad at their job.
yeah, yeah, right. It's like I don't know. It seems like a lot of these people are just bad at their jobs. I mean, in
Like,
2014,
I don't think the Capitol Police actually wanted to overthrow Joe Biden, and they just
right?
sucked.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, yeah, I mean, 2014, there was a guy with a knife who scaled the fence outside the White House and like had actually gotten inside the building, like run across the Rose Garden, got inside the building, and it just happened to be that like the Obama family was out at the time it happened, but like otherwise he totally could have gotten killed. In fact, and then later the same month there was actually a guy. Now this one doesn't seem to have been an intended assassin, but it was written up at the time as kind of shocking. There was this like unvetted guy who had like a criminal record and a gun on him, who was allowed to actually get in an elevator with Obama. And I don't think any of this means the deep state was conspiring to kill Barack Obama. I think it just means that like lots of cops aren't very good at their jobs. But
I thought.
you know, so if this, as it turns out, this does seem like a sort of politically meaningless shooting by somebody with the school shooter profile. But of course, everybody initially assumed that it wasn't, and that initial assumption generated some interesting reactions, which get into the other 2 points. So The first of which, as you say, is about stochastic terrorism. So it seems to me that there's like another interesting role reversal here where, like, for years I was hearing about this from libs, that, I don't know,
By the
AOC.
way, a term which is entirely carried by its very cool name and like reminds me of years of lead and strategy of tension and stuff from Italy, but it's actually not cool at all.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's very correct. But yeah, like this, so like, uh, you know, AOC, for example, who, uh, however exactly you want to classify her politically, has lib-like qualities on many
I just
subjects.
realised stochastic terrorism is gang stalking for public figures.
Okay, I don't.
You know what gang stalking is?
That's not terminology I'm familiar with.
Oh, okay. Gang stalking is when schizophrenic people think they're being gang stalked, as in stalking, but it's by a group of people. And so they interpret everyone else going around their business as them being group stalked by like
Uh,
everyone else around the world. And that's, what's going on where you read, as a politician, you read statements of anything on the internet and assume it's kind of efforts to personally kill you.
right. Yeah. So usually, what the stochastic terrorism is supposed to be that you're, using extreme rhetoric, you're demonizing people, you're being irresponsible, and this, results in acts of terrorism happening, acts of, political violence. And it's a little unclear when many people use the phrase whether it requires intent, because if what you mean is you're sort of using rhetoric with the intention that somebody will do something violent, you don't have a specific person in mind or anything, right? But you're sort of acting in the hopes that somebody will get the idea, right, and do something violent to the people you're talking about. I'm sure there are real examples. Like, I can maybe even think of a couple of plausible examples, and that's a thing, and that's bad, right? But what I'm really talking about is something a little bit broader, which is what, like, again, when AOC accuses Tucker Carlson of stochastic terrorism, I don't think. Oh no.
We've lost Ben.
Think here. I'm gonna try to. All right.
You've been pretty low quality throughout, but
Okay.
your audio has normally been fine.
Okay. Well, maybe the virtual background was a bad idea. So
Straining your lacking resources.
yeah, yeah. I'm in a hotel room.
It
So
looks like you're in like a cupboard.
I can see that. Um, but yeah. So if you're doing the exactly, Sue, the who will rid me of this meddlesome priest thing, right? Then if that's what you mean, fair enough, right? Like, that's a thing, and I think we can sort of coherently talk about that as a thing. But when, like, AOC accuses Tucker Carlson of stochastic terrorism, for example, I don't think she means that he actually has the intent that somebody, like, assault or kill her. Um, Maybe she means he's, like, callously indifferent to, whether that happens or something like that, right? But, like, I don't think that she's saying that he actually has that intent. And certainly, I don't know. I mean, this is, kind of bringing this up as a point of interest. I generally think when we're trying to do, to, like, sort out what we mean by some concept, looking it up in a dictionary is a really bad way to do that, right? But it is a point of interest, at least, that the dictionary.com definition of stochastic terrorism doesn't seem to say anything about intent. It just seems to be It just seems to be the idea of that you're, demonization that, results, results in acts of terrorism. And I think that certainly, again, if we don't just mean the sort of like cases of who will rid me of this meddlesome priest kind of, kind of like stuff where you're actually like, even though you don't have a specific person in mind to do it or whatever, you're certainly saying it with the intent that what you're saying results in acts of violence. If we don't mean that, and I think the sort of politically interesting sense of it would be broader than that, then it just, like where, again, somebody like Tucker Carlson could be accused of it, etc. Then two things. One, it is kind of interesting. There's been this role reversal since the attempted assassination of Trump, where now it's the conservatives who they don't use the phrase, but are essentially running with the stochastic terrorism theory that like, oh, you did this by calling Trump a fascist. And
yeah, I mean, it's basically they're doing like mean words online or real violence.
yeah, exactly. Right. Like, that, yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same thing as like when somebody says, oh, if if you're a public figure and you do transphobia, you're responsible for trans kids getting attacked or etc. Right? Like it's the same theory, right? Like it's just applied by people like JD Vance, who tweeted this like right after the shooting, to liberals calling Trump a fascist. And it's kind of yeah, like I think that it's a bad concept either way, right? I think that the speech violence distinction is fairly important, and I'm very suspicious of attempts to like obfuscate that or blur the line. And in particular, I'm very skeptical that anyone anywhere would actually apply this concept consistently, right? I think in practice, it's always your overheated rhetoric that I disagree with that's responsible for people doing violent things. Whereas,
I'm telling it how it is.
exactly, equally white hot rhetoric on your side, that, you give it a pass because you agree with it, or at least you like the people saying it more. So
He's a fascist, man.
you're more understanding about what they mean by it. Right. And you're likely to be, I think, appropriately skeptical of the idea that there's a clear chain of causation that that's like of the right kind to to make the people who say things like this responsible. And so I give the example in the essay. It's like, look, in the years leading up to Henry Kissinger dying, I wrote numerous articles that I think could be fairly characterized as demonizing him. I mean, I pretty much think Henry Kissinger was a demon. So and if somebody
That's tropes, Ben.
what's that?
That's tropes.
It's tropes. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So if so, look, if somebody who was incensed about all of this, like shot up a CNN studio where Kissinger was being interviewed to, giving one of these fawning interviews about his thoughts as an elder statesman about the state of the world, right? Would I have therefore been shown to have been doing terrorism by proxy, right? That I'd raised the temperature and, and contributed to this act of terrorism. And if not, why not? And if the answer basically boils down to, well, because I was right, then this doesn't actually strike me as a particularly politically interesting concept, because if the rule is, well, you're doing stochastic terrorism if you use extreme overheated rhetoric and later there's violence, unless you're right, then that just seems like an extremely uninteresting rule to me, because the issue and dispute is always going to be that last part.
Yeah, like who are you convincing with this, and about
Right.
what to do what?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, you can't say that. It's like, well, because it's, I mean, why not just skip to the because you're wrong, right? Like, you're wrong, and theoretically, even though you don't intend or
Yeah,
approve
you can't
of.
be like, oh, you incorrectly think that Obama is a Muslim, blah blah blah. So you shouldn't
Yeah,
use such overheated rhetoric. Because they're going to be like, well, I do think Obama's a Muslim, so I'm going to. It's important.
right. Yeah, exactly. Um, it's just not. You're just not. Like if you're I mean, look, if the point of using it is to encourage third parties to just censor people for saying the things, then fair enough. I mean, if you have enough power, you can do that. I will just register the point that I always make in this context, which is that if you identify with the far left, then you should think long and hard about that because we don't actually have very much power. But
Don't. And remember that when you make laws and stuff, the people that enforce them are the police who you don't like.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Hadn't thought of that. Yeah, yeah. So I
I
think
think
it's like
most people
horrible.
do genuinely forget when they're like they support like incredibly wide-ranging hate crime laws, but imagine that they're being enforced by some kind of
Yeah,
magic entity.
yeah. You pass the law, and that just casts a spell that makes it the case that the law, is in effect, rather than that you actually need to use the coercive apparatus of the
Yeah,
state
I think
to.
people imagine it's basically like it means that their posts will get removed on Twitter,
Well,
which
I
is
mean,
probably
remember,
true, but there's a lot more to it than that.
remember in February 2022 when there were all these people, who are like, "Oh, we should do a no-fly zone in Ukraine," and it's like, I remember at the time things like, "Do you think this is like a no-fly zone is like a force field that
Yeah, yeah.
like because rather than something that actually has to be enforced by shooting down Russian planes?" That's yeah, it's yeah, same problem, but I think and I also think that if you're a socialist because at the core of that you think that you agree with CLR James, right? Every cook can govern. You think working class people are capable of managing their own affairs, then I think that's a very poor fit ideologically with thinking that people need to be sheltered from exposure to bad points of view that are going to infect them. So, and again, pragmatically, I think it's horrendously counterproductive for the left to side with weakening free speech norms. But so yeah, if the point is to encourage censorship, I think that's a mistake anyway. If the point is to encourage people to stop saying something, then it's just kind of vacuous because again, if there's a unless you're right clause, then the problem tends to be that people think that what they're saying is right. That's why generally you say things that you think you're right, or even if you're only pretending to think you're right, then you will continue to pretend after somebody says, "Oh, you're doing stochastic terrorism." So, and maybe there's like some clever way of defining the concept that I'm missing here that would get around some of these problems. But I would just say, I think there's at least a real conceptual problem here for anybody who wants to wield this term, and I'm also just very politically wary of the attempt to reclassify certain forms of speech as terrorism. I think that seems like a bad road to go down. Uh, and then, yeah, the last point I would make about stochastic terrorism stuff is in the specific sort of application of it in the JD Vance tweet that I quote, where he's like, "Oh, libs did this by calling Trump a fascist." That it doesn't actually seem to me like whatever you think about the fascism accusation, and we did a whole, I wrote an essay about it, we did a stream about it, right? I've always been something of a skeptic about the fascism analogies for Trump, but if you whatever you think about that, I don't really get this. This doesn't follow, because the sort of thinking that a lot of conservatives seem to have is, well, if you really thought he was a fascist, then you would obviously approve of assassinating him. And I don't see why. I think you could think he was a fascist and still think that assassinating him would be disastrous.
Yeah, I don't think Tommy Robinson should be shot dead.
I mean, I will admit to thinking it was funny when Richard Spencer got punched, but if he'd been like shot in the head, I would have thought that was significantly less funny.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the whole thing of there's been a lot of rhetoric around if Trump wins, this will be like our last ever election, which does seem kind of more plausible kind of
uh,
reasoning behind like, yeah, and then you should shoot him. But obviously, if you shot Trump dead and then the Republicans won, that probably wouldn't be particularly healthy for democracy.
no, I think if you shot Trump dead, then that would presumably um, make like further radicalize his base like quite a bit. And
And I
you
feel like
know,
it would start kind of open season on politicians, right?
also plausibly hand the election to JD Vance, who, and I think if assuming for the sake of argument that we want to call Vance fascist, I actually think this would exacerbate what we would then call the fascist threat rather than diminishing it. Again, Ernst von Roth, as the guy mentioned in the essay, was the Nazi diplomat whose assassination was the pretext for Kristallnacht. I don't think killing him was a blow against fascism, right? You
I
can,
see
that.
now that he was like an ambassador or something, but he was just like the most low level desk guy ever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he was yeah. I think like maybe mid level, but he certainly wasn't the ambassador.
No, I mean like of official diplomatic staff, he was the lowest level, as opposed to like the cleaning lady, the secretary.
Yeah. Yeah, he was just a guy who worked at the embassy. Uh, but yes, also though, literally a fascist. I mean, he was a member of the Nazi Party. He was working in the embassy of the Third Reich in Paris. No doubt
Also, a
whatsoever.
feudal aristocrat.
No doubt whatsoever that he was a fascist. But nevertheless, shooting him seems to have been a bad idea. Um, and yeah, and and as you say, it seems likely that if Trump had been successfully shot, the most probable outcome of this would have been a horrendous cycle of tit for tat political violence, which, this brings us to the final point, I think would be bad. Um, for one thing, pragmatically, again, being part of the extreme left, I will just note that, in the event of a descent into widespread political violence, this would put me in the faction that would have probably the worst ratio of graduate students to military. I probably that's probably not where
Yeah,
you
I
want
mean,
to
I
be when
guess
the shooting
it
starts.
depends who started, right, and who's president.
I mean,
So
yeah,
I think at the top levels, like the U.S. military is like Republican, as in
right.
Democratic.
Yeah. Small R Republican. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I think if there's a in the event of like a civil war to preserve democracy or something, that might be one thing. But if we're just talking about like grassroots political violence, lots of people assassinating each
yeah,
other, right?
yeah.
Then again, I just I love my you know I just have to say I'm kind of imagining being at a DSA meeting when you know people start shooting and like not being a very good place to be, right? In terms of people who know what they're doing, but
And you know what holds back people from doing what that kid did to Trump is not kind of the weapons he had. It's certainly not the Secret Service. Um, and seeing how many kind of deaths from despair and so on and mass shootings, it's also not that there's an insignificant number of people. You don't need very many. You need like 1 in a million per year who are
uh,
willing to die for something in a violent, gory way. Um, what's holding people back from doing stuff like that is basically like a cultural prohibition and like a lack of a conceptual idea of like, oh, this is something I could do. I could just
yeah,
kill the president.
right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's also true. More people do, right? The more, the idea suggests self. But yeah, I mean, I think
Someone
that.
tried to kill him with a forklift truck, and the guy must have had the worst lawyer in the world because the police, or didn't have a lawyer at all because this is America. But the guy was like mentally ill or whatever. But the police arrested him because they thought he was just stealing a forklift lift truck, and he was going to get like 6 months in jail. But then he told them all about, oh, I was actually trying to kill the president, and he got 20 years or something. Completely fucked.
Awesome. Uh, yeah, that is just some Homer Simpson-esque courtroom behavior. Uh, it's like, oh, what that man said isn't true. I wasn't just stealing the truck. I was stealing the truck to try to kill the president. Um, awesome. I love it. But yeah, so there's much more general issue. So there's sort of final issue, and the one that's kind of most suited to the philosophy show context is about.
Which is why we'll be ending very soon, kids.
Yes, we're going to spend like 3 minutes on it, but is about the ethics of political violence, because Branko Marcetic wrote an article for Jacobin called "The Last Thing This Country Needed," where he makes some of the same points that we've just been making for the last few minutes about how this is the sort of thing that could, like when people do stuff like this, it rarely achieves any sort of political goal they care about. It often leads to cycles of tit for tat violence that are end up being a disaster, et cetera, et cetera. And but he also managed to infuriate some portion of left Twitter with his boiling hot take that, and I quote, "killing people is morally wrong," unquote. Um, which, fighting words apparently. And there were all these responses by people who were like, "Oh my God, dude, your magazine is literally called Jacobin. There's a picture of Toussaint Louverture on it. My favorite, you posted this on Bastille Day." Right? It's like you're really disrespecting Bastille Day by,
Wasn't Bastille Day notable because like no one died,
yeah, that's actually also true. Nobody died in the
or like
storming of the
someone like
Bastille.
fell off the battlements or something? But like,
Actually, I don't know. It could have been that a couple people died. I'm actually, as I'm saying this, I realize I'm not 100% on that, but
okay, they only killed one person,
okay.
um,
But like the
but
defenders of the Bastille maybe
93
shot a few people.
protesters were killed.
Okay, okay, yeah. Um, but it's also like, this just seems like, whatever else you want to say about it, this just seems like very, very bad moral reasoning. That to say like, okay, I think the storming of the Bastille was, good actually. Uh, Certainly the Haitian Revolution was good actually. And of course, we could come up with numerous other examples. But all of this is pretty obviously consistent with, quote, "killing people is morally wrong," unquote.
Yeah,
Like,
do you think the Haitian revolutionaries were like, actually killing is good in of itself? Like what? It's this whole thing where it's like where people will be like, actually, communism killed 100 million people, and some people are inclined to say based.
yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that Toussaint Louverture would agree that, yes, killing people is in and of itself actually very morally
It might have
bad.
been quite a big motivation for him doing a slave revolt, actually. Seeing people being killed for no good reason throughout his life.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, and really, I mean, the way, slavery worked and, pre-revolutionary Saint Domingue, it was like, like it was just kind of constantly throwing away people's lives. That was like the business model that,
Yeah,
you just,
full consumption of someone's total labor power in 3 years.
yeah, exactly. Um, so Yeah, I mean, I think that like saying killing people is morally wrong is obviously not the same thing as saying that nothing under any possible historical circumstances would justify killing someone. And this actually shouldn't be a hard distinction to make. That if you want to sort of express all this in the register of highfalutin moral philosophy, you use phrases like prima facie wrongness, you know, there being a pro tanto reason to think that it's, morally wrong, right? In other words, to the extent that this isn't balanced out by other, reasons. But I think if we're just kind of speaking the register of like kind of ordinary everyday moral language that's appropriate for a, you know, popular level article in a political magazine, I think that the way to put that is just killing people is morally wrong, and you kind of assume that your readers aren't idiots, and they understand that that's consistent with saying, yes, there are extreme circumstances under which that all else being equal clause is triggered, right? That if that despite the otherwise overwhelming pro tanto moral wrongness of killing, yeah, look, I mean, lying is morally wrong, but obviously anybody who's not like a lunatic absolutist Kantian is going to acknowledge that if the murderer at the door wants to know where where their victim is, it's okay to lie to them. And you know, like cheating on your wife is morally wrong. Uh, yes, if you were living in a time and a place where marriages were arranged and divorce was illegal and blah 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 blah, then under those circumstances, it wouldn't necessarily be morally wrong to cheat on your wife, right? But like, I think we can. I think you should be able to trust people to like hold both of those thoughts in their heads, right? So it's like, yes, if you're,
I imagine if
you
you
know,
put out actually adultery is wrong article in Jacobin, a lot of people will get triggered.
yeah, I don't know how I would. I've speaking from 5 years of experience of going back and forth with Jacobin editors about different articles that they would or would not publish. I'm just going to tell you that one would be a hard sell, but not
I mean,
necessarily
something
because they
like
would
Colin
disagree.
might have wrote back in the day.
Not because they would
Comical
disagree with the
Bastard.
conclusion, but that's
Yeah.
yes. Uh, yeah, right. I mean, but like also, yeah, I don't know. Actually, like, maybe I would. So maybe that could be a philosophy for the people that say actually adultery is wrong,
Hmm.
which I could find some stuff to respond to. I saw there was a article somebody actually got published in a philosophy journal arguing that arguing against monogamy by like analogy to the wrongness of telling somebody that to be your friend they're not allowed to have other friends.
Classic.
So that's you know so yeah, maybe there is maybe there is a way to be like actually monogamy is okay and cheating is bad. But
I like a lot of kind of radical thought is all about kind of gathering a load of things and being like, actually, all these things that you think are different are the same. And actually, all these things that you think are the same are actually all different.
yeah, it's true, but it's like, yes, if
There's 100 genders, and it's acceptable to cheat on all of them because otherwise, it's you're being a bad friend.
no comment. uh, but but yeah, like how is it that this is a hard distinction, right? Like it's like, yes, if you are in Spain in the 1930s and your society's democratic institutions are, being overthrown by Franco, and you have to either violently resist or just roll over and and be crushed. Yes, under those circumstances, by all means, go ahead
And
and
in those
engage.
circumstances, you have to side with the police. So have fun.
Yeah, also true. One of the most fun things about the Spanish Civil War is that because of the weird political alliances that were going on as everybody was getting together into the Popular Front, there were actually towns that had anarchist police chiefs.
I mean, there was an episode in Barcelona where like anarchists were outside a police station telling them to hand over all their guns, um, because there's about to be a fascist coup, and the police were like, "No, there's not." And then like a boy came running, it's like, "There's a fascist coup," and the policeman like he gave the anarchist his pistol and then went out with his rifle, and they went together.
Right. Yep. Exactly. And yes, if you're a slave in pre-revolutionary Saint Domingue and, democratic processes were never available to you in the first place, by all means, rise up violently and do what you have to do. But,
But make sure to
you
give the Poles the N-word pass if they're nice to you.
TIR deep cut. Yeah. Um, like, but all of this is every bit as consistent with with violence is morally wrong as cheating on your wife is morally wrong is consistent with, yes, under the historical circumstances I just described, right? Go ahead. And it's I think the sort of core point here should be that taking human life being very, very morally bad, it should take quite a bit to justify it. So I think, killing civilians is sort of particularly heinous, as in the firefighter who was killed at the Trump rally. But also, I do agree with your point from the guest essay you wrote last year, which is that traditional just war theory thinking is way too cavalier, even about the deaths of soldiers, right? Like, if you're even killing soldiers is still like a big morally weighty thing that you should you should need a really good justification for, right? Like it's not all of this like sort of, well, that's their job, whatever. I think that's all kind of insane for reasons that we talked about there. Again, I think easier to justify than killing civilians, but like should still be hard to justify. Like it should still be like if you're trying to decide whether to do something that would involve having to take the lives of numerous people who were drafted or signed up for the army, like that is still a really powerful reason not to do it. Now that really powerful reason can be overwhelmed by other considerations under extreme circumstances like the ones we've been talking about, but it should
Yeah,
take
like
some
if you've encircled a battalion of fascists, you should
sure.
go, you should get on the radio and ask them, "Would you like to surrender?"
Yeah, actually, you should. I mean, this is it's one of my favorite moments from George Orwell's homage to Catalonia, where he's talking about the ways that the two camps would, like they'd sort of be like the POUM militia he was in and the fascist troops would sort of be camped out in just a distance where neither of them was quite close enough to actually move in on the other, right? And so they'd ended up having these sort of propaganda wars over the bullhorns, and he says one of the most effective things that they did to get fascist soldiers to desert was just yelling into the bullhorn, "We are eating buttered toast," right? It's like your miserable rations or whatever, like you're gonna be way better if you come over here, and that was a good thing to do, right? It's actually good to give people a chance to surrender and come over to your side, not just pragmatically, although certainly that, right? But like it is actually still good to at least try to do that. So it should take quite a bit to trigger. Yeah, violence is still acceptable. Again, it can be triggered. I'm not arguing for absolute pacifism here, but like it should take a lot. And and if you truly think that the United States like if you truly think, as people like the head of the Brooklyn Institute of Social Research, who was like one of the people who was tweeting at Bronco about that article, or J.W. Mason, lefty economist, who's tweeting out about it, if you truly think that in the United States, like that trigger is pulled, right? Because like remember, it's not just that you have like a morally just goal, right? You have to have some sort of shadow of a possibility that what you're doing will actually succeed in achieving that goal, right? That like at the very damn least
Yeah, I mean
something
that's
from
the
it.
kind of crazy thing about interpersonal political violence is it's a really chancy thing whether it goes your way or not. And to do it, you have to do the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you should have like you should have at least like I mean, I'm not saying that you can't fight if you don't have like overwhelming odds of winning or whatever, but it's like you should have at least a halfway realistic scenario in your head whereby
Yeah, like have a
killing
plan.
killing a bunch of people actually does result in something good. Uh, like whatever the conditions are to justify killing a bunch of people, surely it should include um, there being some sort of halfway plausible scenario whereby something good would result from you doing it. Like that's a pretty minimal bar to clear. And so I guess my last point about this would just be that if you truly believe, as these people were insinuating on Twitter, that bar is cleared when it comes to stuff like shooting at politicians in the U.S., then be less stupid.
Yeah, especially with a guy that's already been president, as we've talked about before.
Ugh. Well,
What's next week? What are you writing next week, and what do you think we'll talk about next week?
yeah, so I'm not 100% sure yet if this is going to come out next week, but I did actually have another essay that was like 2/3 written by the time I thought, oh, I should do something about political violence this time. And it was about something David Harvey says in his companion to Marxist Capital, where he kind of does a critique of analytical Marxism, and so I think he's wrong. So I do have this David Harvey essay that's like 2/3 written. I'm not 100% sure
Guys,
that'll
something crazy might happen. Ben's going to write an article about analytical Marxism.
yeah. Uh, so um, so yeah, it's that's so I might finish that up for I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be next Sunday or not, but if it's not, it's going to be very soon.
Great news. Everyone comment below. Nice video, YouTube man.
Sounds good.
Bye.